The silence was the thing I craved most. Not the dead, flat silence of a soundproofed room, but the living, breathing quiet of a peaceful life. The gentle rustle of leaves in a breeze, the distant laughter of children, the soft hum of a world at ease with itself. For 20 years, my world had been a hermetically sealed container of recycled air, the low thrum of servers, and the high-frequency tension of life or death decisions made from 7,000 miles away. As a pilot, I had never felt the wind on my face at 30,000 feet. My cockpit was a darkened, air-conditioned box in the Nevada desert. My aircraft were silent, gray predators that haunted skies half a world away. When I retired, I left the callsign Ghost behind, determined to finally find a place where I could just be Elias Vance, a man who wanted nothing more than a small yard and a quiet sky. Eagle's Landing seemed to be that place. The name itself was a bit on the nose, but the community was the embodiment of tranquil suburbia, manicured lawns, stately brick houses, and an almost religious devotion to order. It was perfect. I bought a modest two-story home with a clear, unobstructed view of the northern sky, a critical feature for my hobby. My footlocker, the only piece of military life I'd kept, sat in the corner of my new study, filled not with old uniforms, but with the schematics and components of my new life's work. It was time to fly again, but this time, it would be on my own terms, for my own reasons. On the third day, after the movers had gone and the last box was unpacked, I decided it was time for the maiden flight. I walked into my backyard, the lush St. Augustine grass cool beneath my feet. I opened a sleek, black Pelican case and began to assemble the craft. It wasn't a commercial drone, no flimsy white plastic or high-pitched whine of cheap motors. This was different. It was molded from a single piece of matte black carbon composite, its lines elegant and predatory. It had no visible rotors. Its lift was generated by a series of ducted fans, an experimental system designed for near-silent operation. I ran through the pre-flight checklist, a ritual ingrained in my very soul. Power on, satellite link established, inertial navigation calibrated, control surfaces responsive. I took a deep breath, the clean suburban air a welcome change from the stale air of the command center. With a soft, almost imperceptible whoosh, the drone, which I called the Nightingale, lifted off the ground. It hovered at 10 feet, as silent and steady as a hummingbird. It was a marvel of engineering, and it was my creation. The tranquility lasted for exactly 94 seconds. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" The voice was a shriek, a blade of pure indignation that sliced through the peaceful afternoon. A woman was marching across my lawn from the house next door, her face a thunderous mask of outrage. She was in her late 50s, dressed in immaculate white tennis apparel, her blonde hair coiffed into a rigid, aerodynamic style. She held her phone up, already recording. "That thing!" she spat, pointing a trembling finger at the hovering drone. "You are invading my privacy. This is a complete violation. I am on the phone with the police right now." I calmly keyed a command, and the Nightingale descended, settling onto its landing pad with a soft sigh. "Ma'am, there's no need for that," I said, my voice even and calm, a tone I had perfected over years of high-stress communications. "The camera isn't even recording. I'm just running some basic motor diagnostics." "Lies," she screeched. "I know what these things are for. You're a pervert, a spy. I am Cynthia Harding, president of the Eagle's Landing Homeowners Association, and I will not have spy drones in my neighborhood." "I can assure you, I'm not spying on anyone," I said, trying to de-escalate. I'm a federally licensed unmanned aerial pilot. I'm flying well below the legal altitude ceiling, and I'm not leaving the confines of my own property. I don't care about your license, she sneered, her eyes narrowing. I care about the rules of this community, and I will see to it that your little toy is grounded. Permanently. She turned on her heel and marched back across the lawn, still talking into her phone in a loud, performative voice. I stood there, the quiet hum of the nightingale's cooling fans the only sound. The peace I had sought, the quiet sky I had dreamed of, was already under siege. I hadn't even been here a week, and I had already made a powerful, irrational enemy. A familiar, weary feeling settled into my bones. It seemed that even in retirement, I would still have to fight for airspace. The first salvo in Cynthia Harding's war against me arrived 3 days later. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, tucked officiously under my door knocker. Inside, on thick, embossed letterhead, featuring the Eagle's Landing Eagle logo, was an official notice of a new emergency bylaw. Bylaw 113B, the operation of unmanned aerial systems. In prose that was both florid and draconian, it detailed a complete and total ban on the flying of any drone, of any size or type, within the borders of the community, citing concerns for privacy, safety, and the preservation of neighborhood tranquility. The bylaw had been proposed by President Harding, seconded by her husband, the board's treasurer, and unanimously approved by the 3 other members of her hand-picked board. It was a legal instrument crafted for a single target: me. A week after that, the first fine arrived. $100 for violation of Bylaw 113B. The notice included a grainy, zoomed-in photograph of the nightingale hovering over my backyard, clearly taken by Cynthia from her second-story window. It was dated the day after the new bylaw was enacted. She had been watching, waiting for me to transgress. I attended the next monthly HOA meeting, held in a sterile, beige community center room that smelled faintly of stale coffee. I waited patiently through discussions of holiday decoration guidelines and proposed changes to the pet leash policy. When the floor was opened for new business, I stood up. My name is Elias Vance. I live at 114 Patriot Way, I began, my voice calm and steady. I'd like to address the new bylaw regarding unmanned aerial systems. Cynthia, seated at the head of the table, fixed me with a predatory glare. Her posture was ramrod straight, her hands folded neatly on top of her binder. She was in her element. I understand the concerns about privacy, I continued, addressing the dozen or so other residents in the room. However, a blanket ban like this is a significant overreach. Federal aviation law, as governed by the FAA, preempts any local statutes regarding navigable airspace. While an HOA can regulate what happens on the ground, it cannot legally prohibit flight over the property. Are you a lawyer, Mr. Vance? Cynthia cut in, her voice dripping with condescension. No, I said, but I am a licensed pilot with over 2 decades of experience, and I am intimately familiar with FAA regulations. I am suggesting a compromise. We could draft a more reasonable rule, one that sets specific hours for flight, establishes no-fly zones over private yards, and requires pilots to register with the HOA. That would address the privacy concerns without implementing an unenforceable and legally dubious total ban. The board has already voted, Cynthia declared, her voice cold and final. Bylaw 113B stands. If you have an issue with it, you can take it up with our legal counsel. Next item. The dismissal was absolute. The other residents shuffled their papers, refusing to meet my eye. I had presented a logical, reasonable compromise, and she had swatted it away like a fly. She wasn't interested in a solution. She was interested in victory. I sat down, the feeling of quiet frustration hardening into a cold resolve. She had made it clear that reason was not a language she understood. So, I adapted. My work with the Nightingale was not a mere hobby. It was a contractual obligation. I was the lead civilian consultant for a next-generation avionics company, tasked with field testing the prototype for a revolutionary new stealth and sensor package. The contract stipulated a minimum of 20 flight hours per month, under varied environmental conditions. Failure to meet those hours would be a breach of contract. I stopped flying during the day. Instead, I began my test flights in the deep, pre-dawn twilight. I would rise at 4 a.m., the world outside still and silent, cloaked in darkness. In these quiet hours, the Nightingale truly lived up to its name. Its matte black finish rendered it nearly invisible against the fading night sky, and its acoustic baffling made it utterly silent to anyone sleeping below. It was the perfect stealth craft, and Cynthia's intransigence was now inadvertently helping me test its core capabilities. I would sit in my study, the glow of the control console illuminating my face, and guide the Nightingale through its complex testing protocols. The world outside my window was a sleeping suburb, but on my screen, it was a complex topographical map, overlaid with streams of telemetry data, thermal signature nominal, acoustic output below 15 decibels at 100 feet. Electro-optical sensor performance in low-light conditions exceeds projections by 12%. I was doing my job, but with every silent, successful flight, I knew I was also defying Cynthia Harding. The battle had moved into the shadows, into the quiet hours before the dawn. It was a tactical shift, a familiar concept, and I knew, with a grim certainty, that she would escalate in response. Cynthia's inability to catch me flying during the day must have driven her to a state of apoplectic frustration. If she couldn't prove I was breaking her rules, she would find a way to physically prevent me from following my protocols. The escalation from legal intimidation to minor property damage was as predictable as it was cowardly. The attacks were small, deniable, and aimed with surgical precision at the infrastructure of my work. The first incident targeted my ground control station, to ensure a clean, powerful signal for the high-bandwidth data the Nightingale transmitted. I used a small, tripod-mounted directional antenna, which I would set up in my backyard during flights. One morning, as I was preparing for a 4 a.m. flight, I went outside to find the primary coaxial cable had been cut. It wasn't a ragged tear, as if an animal had chewed through it. It was a single, neat, clean slice, made by a pair of wire cutters. The act was as deliberate as it was malicious. It cost me the flight for that day and forced me to spend hours sourcing and replacing the specialized shielded cable. A week later, the target was the drone's landing pad. I had marked out a precise 5-foot circle on a patch of my lawn with environmentally safe paint, ensuring the Nightingale's autonomous landing system had a clear, consistent target. I came out one evening to find the circle doused in a thick, black, viscous substance. It was motor oil. It had been poured deliberately over the entire landing zone, fouling the grass and rendering the optical markings useless. The smell was acrid and unpleasant, a clear message of contempt. It took me a full weekend of digging up the contaminated sod and replacing it to restore the landing area. Each act was a phantom attack, with no direct evidence pointing to a culprit. There were no witnesses in the dead of night, no fingerprints left behind. It could have been mischievous teenagers, a random act of vandalism. But I knew. The precision of the cut cable, the targeted nature of the oil slick, it all pointed to a singular, obsessive source. This was Cynthia's work, or, more likely, the work of her meek, silent husband, Gary, acting as her proxy. My response was not to confront her or file a police report based on suspicion alone. In my former life, we dealt with asymmetric threats. You didn't charge blindly at an unseen enemy. You improved your intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. You fortified your position and waited for the enemy to reveal themselves. I spent the next 2 days transforming my property into a miniature surveillance state. I purchased and installed a network of high-end, low-light security cameras. They were not the conspicuous white domes you see on most suburban homes. These were small, discreet, and powerful, the kind of technology often used for wildlife observation or covert security. I placed them meticulously, one disguised as a birdhouse, with a perfect view of the antenna station, another tucked into the eaves of the roof overlooking the landing pad, and a third with a wide-angle lens covering the entire backyard and the property line with Cynthia's house. The system fed into a secure, encrypted network drive in my study. As I ran the final diagnostics on the camera feeds, I felt a familiar, grim satisfaction. I was re-establishing perimeter security. I was building a pattern of life profile on my adversary, a term from my old job that referred to mapping a target's daily routines and habits. I watched the footage, noting the times Cynthia and her husband left and returned, the path the dog walker took, the schedule of the mail carrier. It was an analytical, detached process, but its purpose was deadly serious. I continued my pre-dawn flights, now with the added security of an unblinking electronic eye watching my back. I felt a cold anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. My work, which had the potential to save the lives of soldiers and airmen, was being threatened by this petty, suburban tyrant. She had forced me to turn my peaceful sanctuary into a fortified outpost. She thought she was fighting a war over noise and privacy. She had no idea she was escalating a conflict with a man who had been trained, at great expense, by the United States government in the arts of surveillance and strategic response. And my patience was wearing dangerously thin. Having failed to ground me through bylaws and sabotage, Cynthia shifted her tactics from my property to my character. She launched a campaign of social isolation and slander on the Eagles Landing Neighborhood Forum, a private Facebook group that served as the community's digital wellspring of gossip, passive aggression, and mob justice. Her goal was no longer just to stop my flights. It was to brand me as a deviant, a creep, and a threat to the community's wholesome character. Her opening shot was a post dripping with feigned concern. "Good morning, neighbors," it began, accompanied by a picture of a smiling kitten. A gentle word of caution. It has come to my attention that a certain resident is engaging in activity that involves flying a drone over our homes, potentially in the dead of night. As a mother and grandmother, the thought of an unknown camera hovering in the darkness is deeply disturbing. Please, be vigilant. Keep your blinds closed and report any suspicious activity. She never used my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The comment section immediately lit up with a predictable mix of outrage and paranoia. "This is horrifying. What is wrong with people?" I knew there was something strange about that guy. "Thank you for looking out for us." "Cynthia." A few lone voices of reason attempted to inject some logic. "Are we sure he's actually filming anything?" But they were quickly shouted down by the rising tide of fear. The effect on my daily life was immediate and chilling. The few tentative smiles and waves I'd been receiving from neighbors vanished overnight. When I went to retrieve my mail, conversations would cease, and people would suddenly find the pavement intensely interesting. Parents walking with their children would subtly steer them to the other side of the street as I approached. I was no longer the new neighbor. I was the neighborhood pervert, the faceless boogeyman in the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. The isolation was a familiar feeling, a painful echo of the profound loneliness of my old job. I had spent countless hours in a dark room, the only connection to my crew, a disembodied voice in my headset. The only connection to the world, a silent, pixelated video feed. I had felt like a ghost then, an unseen presence in other people's lives. Now, Cynthia had made me a ghost in my own neighborhood. Her online attacks grew bolder, more specific, and more vicious. She posted about my military-style drone, hinting that it was some kind of weapon. She invented stories about seeing it hover outside her teenage daughter's bedroom window, a particularly vile and inflammatory lie. "I don't feel safe in my own home anymore," she wrote in a particularly dramatic post. "This man, with his high-tech spying equipment, is a menace. He has no respect for our rules, our privacy, or our children. Who knows what he is capable of?" The anger I felt was a cold, hard, dense thing. This wasn't about a bylaw anymore. This was a deliberate, malicious attack on my honor. She was twisting my past service, the very foundation of my career, into something sordid and ugly. The technology I was testing, designed to protect American lives, was being slandered as a tool for a common peeping Tom. My first instinct was to fight back, to log on and refute her lies one by one. But I knew it would be pointless. Arguing with a zealot in a forum she controlled was a losing battle. It would only feed the drama and make me look defensive and unhinged. So, I maintained my silence. But it was not a passive silence. Just as I had installed cameras to watch my property, I began to meticulously archive her digital assault. Every post, every slanderous comment, every fabricated accusation was screenshotted, its URL and metadata saved, and the entire file placed in a folder labeled libel. I was an intelligence analyst by training. I knew how to build a dossier. Cynthia, in her arrogant crusade, was unknowingly providing me with all the ammunition I would ever need. One afternoon, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A young man, probably no older than 25, got out. He walked with a slight, almost imperceptible limp. He was a candidate liaison from the avionics company, a former soldier who had been injured in the field and now worked as a consultant on new projects. He was here to deliver a new sensor component. As he walked back to his car, I saw Cynthia watching from her window, her phone pressed to her ear. I knew what would happen next. That evening, a new post appeared on the forum. The drone flyer now has strange men visiting him. The situation on Patriot Way is getting more and more unsettling. I saved the screenshot. I added it to the file, and I waited. The storm of her making was growing, but I knew that the brightest lightning is always followed by the loudest thunder. Having successfully painted me as a neighborhood pariah, Cynthia escalated her campaign to its logical next step. She began to weaponize the authorities. Her goal was no longer simply to enforce an HOA bylaw, but to bring the full weight of the law down upon me, to have me officially branded as a criminal. It started with the local police. The first time they showed up, two weary-looking officers. It was in response to a peeping Tom call from Cynthia. I calmly invited them in, showed them my FAA pilot's license, and explained that I was a drone hobbyist testing new equipment, always within the bounds of my own property. I assured them the camera was used for navigation and diagnostics, not for looking into windows. They were professional, but clearly annoyed at having their time wasted. They left after giving me a lecture on being considerate to my neighbors. This became a recurring event. Cynthia would call them at least once a week, each time with a more frantic and embellished story. The police visits became a part of my routine. The officers started greeting me by my first name. They knew the calls were baseless, but they were legally obligated to respond. It was a classic harassment tactic, and it was working. My house was now known to law enforcement, another black mark against my name in the neighborhood. When the local police failed to shut me down, Cynthia aimed higher. She filed a formal, multi-page complaint with the Federal Aviation Administration. This was a significant and dangerous escalation. A complaint to the FAA is not like a call to the local police. They are the federal body that governs all flight in the United States, and they do not take complaints lightly. Her complaint was a work of malicious fiction. She claimed I was flying my drone in a reckless and dangerous manner. She alleged I was exceeding the 400-foot altitude limit, flying over crowded areas our quiet suburban street, and, most seriously, that I was operating within the 5-mile restricted airspace of a small municipal airport on the other side of town. This last accusation, a complete fabrication, was designed to trigger an immediate and serious FAA investigation. A week later, a stern-faced man in a crisp blue windbreaker with an FAA logo on the breast pocket was at my door. He was an official investigator. This was no longer a neighborhood squabble. This was a federal matter. "Mr. Elias Vance," he asked, his tone all business. "I'm Agent Davies from the FAA. I'm here to investigate a formal complaint regarding your UAS operations." "Of course," I said, my heart rate kicking up a notch. "Please, come in." For the next 2 hours, he subjected me to a rigorous grilling. He demanded to see my pilot's license, the drone's registration number, and my flight logs. I had been anticipating this. My logs were immaculate, stored digitally, with every flight's duration, altitude, and GPS track recorded and time-stamped. He inspected the Nightingale itself. His eyebrows shot up when he saw it. "This isn't an off-the-shelf model," he stated, his expert eye immediately recognizing the custom design. "No," I said carefully. "It's a personal project. A prototype." He spent a long time examining the avionics, his gaze lingering on a small, black box near the primary flight controller. "What's this?" he asked. "It looks like a military-grade encrypted data link module." The air in the room grew thick. This was the moment where my cover story could unravel. I couldn't tell him the truth, that the module was the very heart of the system I was testing. A next-generation, jam-proof communication link. "It's a custom anti-hacking protocol I designed," I said, which was technically true, "to prevent anyone from hijacking the control signal. A safety feature." He looked at me, then back at the drone. A long, calculating stare. He was a professional, and he knew something was different here. But he couldn't prove it. My paperwork was perfect. My logs were flawless. The GPS data confirmed I had never left my property, never exceeded 150 feet in altitude, and was nowhere near the airport's restricted airspace. "Mr. Vance," he said finally, closing his notebook, "your logs are meticulous, and, based on the data, you haven't violated any federal regulations. However, the complainant is persistent. Flying in a contested residential area, even legally, is asking for trouble. I'm leaving this investigation open, but I'm advising you to cease operations until this civil dispute with your HOA is resolved. Any further complaints will trigger a more comprehensive review." The threat was clear. He was warning me to stand down. After he left, the calm facade I had maintained finally cracked. I paced my study, a cold knot of fury and anxiety in my stomach. Cynthia had found a way to ground me. She was using a federal agency to choke my work, to force me into breaching my contract. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "It's Elias," I said when the man on the other end answered. "General Thorne, I have a situation here." "I've been waiting for your call. Ghost," the general's familiar, gravelly voice replied. "I read your sitrep. The FAA." She lied. "General," I said, my voice tight. "Filed a false report. They've warned me off. The program's low visibility status is compromised. I can't meet the flight hour requirements without risking a full federal seizure of the Nightingale." There was a long pause. "This has gone on long enough," General Thorne said, his voice now cold as ice. "This project is too important to be derailed by a suburban busybody. It's time for a demonstration. Elias, a public one. We're going to make it very clear who you are and what you're doing. Send me the time and place of your next confrontation. I'll handle the logistics. It's time we reminded people what a patriot looks like." Cynthia, emboldened by the FAA's visit and my subsequent lack of visible flight activity, believed she had won. She was convinced her campaign of attrition had finally broken me. For her final act, she decided she needed a public execution. She planned a spectacle to cement her victory and humiliate me in front of the entire community, ensuring I would be driven out of Eagle's Landing for good. The chosen moment was a bright, cloudless Saturday morning. She called the local police again, this time with a frantic, theatrical story about how I was tampering with my illegal drone in my open garage, preparing for another night of spying. But this time, she didn't stop there. She also called the local television news station, feeding their tip line a sensational story about a rogue drone pilot terrorizing a suburban neighborhood. By 10 a.m., my quiet cul-de-sac had been transformed into a media circus. 2 police cars were parked at the curb, their lights off but their presence imposing. A news van with a large satellite dish on its roof was parked behind them. A reporter, a young woman with a microphone and an earnest expression, was interviewing Cynthia on her lawn. Neighbors had crept out of their houses, drawn by the commotion, watching from a safe distance. Cynthia was in her element. She gesticulated wildly, pointing at my house, her voice ringing with the passion of a righteous crusader. "For months, this man has terrorized us," she proclaimed to the camera. "He has flown his spy drone over our homes, recording our children, violating our privacy, and showing a flagrant disregard for our community's rules and our safety. The police and the FAA have been warned. But today, we have him. We are demanding that he be stopped, that his machine be confiscated, and that our peace be restored." The police officers looked profoundly uncomfortable. They knew this was a circus, but they had to be there. The reporter was eating it up. The neighbors were murmuring amongst themselves, their expressions a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. I watched the scene unfold from my living room window, my heart a steady, slow drum in my chest. Everything was in place. As Cynthia was reaching the crescendo of her performance, 2 sleek, black sedans with government license plates turned silently onto our street. They didn't park at the curb. They pulled directly up to the foot of my driveway, blocking it off. The news camera immediately swiveled to focus on them. The murmuring of the crowd died down, replaced by a confused silence. The driver's side door of the lead sedan opened, and a man in a crisp, dark suit and an earpiece stepped out. He scanned the scene, his eyes missing nothing. Then, he walked around and opened the rear passenger door. A man in a deep blue United States Air Force dress uniform emerged. He was tall and imposing, his silver hair cut military short. The jacket of his uniform was a constellation of ribbons and medals, and on each shoulder glittered the 4 silver stars of a full general. It was General Marcus Thorne. He completely ignored the police, the news crew, and the stunned crowd of onlookers. His gaze was fixed on my house. On cue, my garage door slid open with a soft hum. I walked out and stood at the edge of my driveway. I was not in my usual civilian clothes. I was wearing a clean, unadorned, olive drab flight suit. General Thorne strode purposefully up my driveway. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. The entire street held its breath. The news camera was zoomed in tight, capturing every detail. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he snapped to rigid attention, his back straight as a steel rod, and executed a salute so sharp and precise it seemed to cut the air. "Colonel Vance," he boomed, his voice a commander's voice, a voice that carried across parade grounds and continents. "It's good to see you on your feet, sir. I trust the Nightingale is performing to specifications." I returned the salute, the motion as natural to me as breathing. "Perfectly, General," I replied, my voice steady. "The acoustic baffling is even better than the simulations predicted. She's a ghost." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Cynthia Harding stood frozen on her lawn, her mouth agape, her face a mask of utter horrified disbelief. The reporter, sensing the story of a lifetime, scrambled towards the general, her cameraman trailing behind her. General Thorne turned to face the camera, his expression one of pure, undiluted authority. "To be clear," he began, his voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. "The man you know as Elias Vance is retired Colonel Elias Ghost, Vance of the United States Air Force. He is a decorated hero and one of the most skilled unmanned systems pilots this country has ever produced. He is not a hobbyist." He gestured towards my garage. "The aircraft he is testing, the XQ-7 Nightingale, is a next-generation, near-silent reconnaissance platform. Colonel Vance is the lead civilian test pilot for the program. His home, and this immediate area, is a designated, albeit classified, civilian test site for critical national security operations. His flights are not a nuisance. They are sanctioned missions vital to the safety of our soldiers and our nation." The general's gaze then fell upon Cynthia, and the temperature on the street seemed to drop by 20 degrees. The spying this woman has repeatedly and falsely reported is, in fact, the Nightingale's advanced terrain mapping and sensor masking systems undergoing live field calibration. Her actions, her frivolous complaints to local and federal authorities, and her constant harassment have not only slandered a decorated officer, but have actively interfered with and endangered a vital national defense program. The reporter, her face pale with shock, slowly turned the microphone away from the general and pointed it directly at Cynthia. "Ms. Harding," she asked, her voice suddenly trembling with predatory excitement, "do you have any comment on your repeated harassment of a classified military operation?" Cynthia stood there, utterly speechless, the camera's red light blinking like a malevolent eye. Her world, her authority, her entire sense of righteous certainty had just been publicly and spectacularly obliterated by a 4-star general on her front lawn. The aftermath was not a quiet fizzle, but a deafening explosion. The local news story went viral overnight. National news outlets picked it up, running segments with headlines like, "Suburban Showdown, HOA, Karen harasses secret military drone program." Cynthia Harding became an overnight internet meme, a national symbol of petty tyranny colliding with profound reality. Her face was everywhere, frozen in that moment of horrified realization. The official consequences were far more severe. The Department of the Air Force's legal branch in coordination with the Department of Justice, took the matter very seriously. Interfering with a national defense operation, even out of ignorance, is a federal crime. Cynthia was formally investigated for obstruction, filing false reports to federal agencies, and harassment of a federal contractor. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including my meticulous logs and her own archived words from the neighborhood forum, she was advised to take a plea deal. She was hit with crippling fines that likely wiped out her savings, sentenced to 2 years of federal probation, and forced to issue a public, court-mandated apology to me and the United States Air Force. The social fallout in Eagles Landing was absolute. She was stripped of her HOA presidency and shunned with a totality that made my own previous isolation seem like a minor inconvenience. She and her husband became ghosts in their own home. The for sale sign went up within a month. They sold the house at a significant loss to a young family who seemed blissfully unaware of the drama that had transpired there. With Cynthia gone, a new sense of reason settled over the community. The HOA board was completely reformed. The ridiculous bylaw was rescinded, and a new era of neighborly respect began. The community's fear and suspicion of me transformed into a quiet, almost reverential awe. I was no longer the neighborhood creep. I was the quiet hero, the colonel living at the end of the cul-de-sac. A few weeks later, I am in my backyard on a clear, calm evening. The nightingale ascends silently into the twilight sky, its running lights off, a ghost disappearing into the deepening blue. A neighbor, a man who had previously been one of Cynthia's most vocal supporters, walks hesitantly to the property line. "Colonel Vance," he says, his voice filled with genuine remorse. I wanted to apologize. We had no idea." He's holding a plate of still warm brownies. "A peace offering." I walk over and accept the plate. "Thank you," I say, offering a small smile. "And please, call me Elias." He nods, relieved. We stand there for a moment, two neighbors watching the sky. The silence is finally what I had dreamed of, not an absence of sound, but a presence of peace, earned and understood. My work continues. My mission is secure, and the quiet sky above Eagles Landing is finally, truly mine.